the lone farmer listened as the giant Apache girl said, "I'm starving for a man's touch." The farmer lived alone at the far edge of the valley, where the land opened wide and the sky felt close enough to touch. His small house stood near a slow river built from old wood he had repaired again and again with his own hands. Every board had a story, every nail had been placed with care. He woke before sunrise each day, not because he had to, but because silence felt easier to face when the world was still asleep. His name was Elias, though very few people still used it. Years ago, there had been neighbors close enough to wave at, markets busy enough to lose an afternoon in, and voices that filled the evenings with noise and laughter. Time had thinned all of that. Droughts came, families moved away, some people never returned. Elias stayed, not out of stubbornness, but because the land had become the only thing that truly understood him. He farmed modestly. A few rows of corn, some beans, a patch of wheat, and a small orchard that struggled but survived. He worked slowly, carefully, as if rushing might anger the soil. His hands were rough and cracked, his shoulders bent from years of lifting and digging. Still, there was a calm strength in him. He did not speak much, but when he did, his words were chosen carefully, like seeds planted with hope rather than waste. Most days followed the same pattern. He fed his animals, checked the water lines, and walked the fields. At midday, he rested under the shade of a large cottonwood tree and ate simple food. Bread, cheese, sometimes fruit. He watched clouds drift across the sky and let his thoughts wander. In the evening, he fixed tools, mended fences, or read from old books that smelled of dust and memory. Loneliness was always there, but it had become familiar, like a quiet ache that never fully left. Elias had once known love. He had once known loss, too. After that, he learned how to keep his heart steady by keeping his life small. He did not look for trouble, and trouble rarely looked for him. That changed the day the rumors began. At first they came as passing words from a trader who stopped by for water. The man spoke of strange tracks in the hills, too large to belong to any animal, too clear to be ignored. Another time, a traveler mentioned seeing a tall figure at dusk, moving between rocks with long, careful steps. Some said it was a spirit. Others said it was a giant woman from the old Apache stories still walking the land her people once guarded. Elias listened, nodded politely, and said nothing. He did not believe in rumors, but he respected the land enough to know it could still surprise people. Stories had always grown in empty places, fed by fear and imagination. He returned to his work and let the words fade like smoke. But as days passed, signs began to appear closer to home. One morning he found a section of fence pushed down, not broken, just gently pressed aside as if something large had stepped through without wanting to cause harm. Another evening he noticed his water barrel was lower than usual, though he was sure he had filled it. The ground near the river showed deep footprints that did not match any animal he knew. These things unsettled him, but they also stirred something else. Curiosity. At night, Elias began to sit outside longer, listening. The valley had its own language, wind through grass, insects calling to each other, the distant cry of an owl. Now and then that he thought he heard another sound, low and steady, like breathing carried across the hills. He told himself it was nothing. Still, he kept his lantern close. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in deep orange and purple, Elias walked to the edge of his field to check the soil. The air felt heavier than usual, charged with a strange stillness. The birds had gone quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause. That was when he felt it, not fear, but awareness. He was not alone. He turned slowly, hand resting on the handle of his shovel, not to threaten, but to steady himself. Near the tree line where shadows stretched long and dark, something moved. A figure stepped forward, tall enough to make the cottonwoods seem small by comparison. The ground seemed to accept each step without protest, as if it recognized the presence. Elias did not run. He did not shout. Years of living alone had taught him that panic solved nothing. The figure stopped at the edge of a field. As the light shifted, he could see more clearly. It was a woman, unmistakably so, yet far larger than any person he had ever seen. Her hair fell thick and dark over her shoulders. Her clothing was simple, worn, and patched, clearly made for survival rather than comfort. Her face carried strength, but also exhaustion, as if she had walked a very long road. She did not move closer. She did not raise her voice. She simply stood there, watching him as carefully as he watched her. Elias felt his heart beat faster, but his thoughts stayed clear. This was no story, no rumor passed between strangers. This was real. The land had delivered something unexpected to his quiet life, and there was no turning away from it now. For a long moment, neither spoke. The woman's eyes moved over the fields, the house, the animals in the distance. There was hunger in her gaze, but not the kind that could be fed by food alone. It was the hunger of someone who had been alone for too long, who had been pushed to the edge of the world and forgotten there. When she finally spoke, her voice was deep and steady, shaped by wind and open spaces. She did not sound angry. She did not sound threatening. She sounded honest. Elias listened. He did not interrupt. He did not judge. He simply stood, rooted to the earth he had trusted all his life, aware that this moment, this meeting, was the beginning of something that would change him, whether he wanted it to or not. The sun slipped below the horizon, and the first stars appeared. The valley, which had always felt empty, now felt full of meaning. Whatever came next, Elias knew one thing for certain. His quiet life had ended, and a story far larger than himself had begun. The woman did not step closer that night. After speaking, she remained where she was, as if giving Elias space to breathe and think. The air between them felt heavy, but not dangerous. It was filled with questions that neither of them knew how to ask yet. Elias stood quietly, his hands relaxed at his sides, showing that he meant no harm. After a long pause, he finally spoke. His voice was calm, though his heart was still beating fast. He asked who she was and why she had come so close to his land. He chose his words carefully, the way he always did, because he sensed that this moment required respect more than courage. The woman answered slowly. She told him her name was Ayana. She said she came from the mountains far to the west, places where her people once lived freely. Over time, she had been forced to move again and again, not always by violence, but by fear. People ran when they saw her. Others tried to chase her away. Some threw stones from a distance. No one tried to speak to her as a person. Elias listened without interrupting. He had spent years listening to the land, and now he listened to her in the same way, patiently, fully. Ayana explained that she traveled mostly at night to avoid being seen. She followed rivers, old trails, and the memory of places that once felt safe. Hunger followed her everywhere. Food was hard to find in large enough amounts, and even when she managed, it never seemed to be enough. But there was another hunger she struggled to explain, one that made her chest feel tight and her thoughts restless. She said loneliness could feel heavier than her own body. Those words stayed with Elias. He understood loneliness more than he cared to admit. Though his life was quiet, he had chosen it. Ayana's loneliness had been forced upon her. That difference mattered. As the night grew colder, Elias noticed her arms were marked with old scars, not fresh, but deep enough to tell stories of long hardship. He felt a quiet sadness rise in him. Without thinking too much, he offered her water. He lifted the bucket slowly and set it on the ground between them, then stepped back. Ayana hesitated. She studied his face, searching for signs of fear or tricks. Finding none, she knelt carefully and drank. The ground seemed to tremble slightly beneath her weight, but Elias remained still. When she finished, she nodded once, a small gesture that carried real meaning. That night ended without more words. Ayana stepped back into the trees, disappearing as silently as she had arrived. Elias stayed outside long after she left, staring into the dark. Sleep did not come easily. His mind replayed every word, every movement. He knew that once you truly saw something, you could not pretend it never existed. The next morning, Elias woke earlier than usual. The valley looked the same, yet it felt different, like a place holding a secret. As he walked his fields, he noticed signs that Ayana had passed through during the night. Crops were untouched, fences carefully avoided. It told him something important. She was careful not to take more than she needed. That afternoon, Elias prepared extra food. He cooked beans and bread, wrapped them in cloth, and left them near the edge of the field where she had stood the night before. He did not wait nearby. He returned to his work, trusting that if she wanted it, she would come. By evening, the food was gone. This small exchange became a quiet routine. Elias left food and water. Ayana took them. Sometimes she left signs in return. A neatly stacked pile of firewood, a broken fence mended with surprising care, a cleared path through rough ground. They spoke little at first, but presence itself became a kind of conversation. When they did talk, it was usually at dusk. Ayana stayed at a distance, and Elias respected that. She told him more about her past in pieces, like broken stones slowly forming a path. She spoke of her people's stories, of respect for land and balance. She spoke of how being different had made her both strong and deeply tired. Elias shared parts of his life, too. He talked about the farm, the years of drought, the people who had left. He did not speak much about his loss, but Ayana seemed to understand without him explaining. Sometimes silence filled the space between them, and neither felt the need to push it away. Not all moments were calm. One night, distant voices echoed through the valley. Torches flickered on the far hills. Ayana stiffened immediately. Fear crossed her face, sharp and familiar. Elias saw then how often she must have run. He told her to move toward the river, where the land dipped and the reeds grew tall. He did not touch her. He only pointed and spoke gently. She followed without question. The searchers never reached the farm. They turned back, perhaps afraid of what they might find. When the valley fell quiet again, Ayana returned. She stood closer than she ever had before, close enough for Elias to feel the warmth of her presence. That night, trust began to grow. Not suddenly, not easily, but honestly. Days passed, and the rhythm of Elias's life shifted. He still worked his fields, but now he worked knowing someone was watching from the hills, someone who understood the land differently but just as deeply. Ayana began helping in small ways, lifting fallen trees, clearing heavy stones that Elias could never move alone. She did not do it to impress him. She did it because helping felt good. Their bond grew from shared effort and shared silence, not from promises or plans. Elias never asked her to stay. Ayana never said she would leave. They lived moment to moment, learning each other's presence. But beneath it all, Elias felt the weight of what was coming. The world beyond the valley did not change easily. People feared what they did not understand. He knew that their quiet peace could not last forever. Still, for the first time in many years, Elias did not feel completely alone. Ayana, the valley no longer felt like just another place to pass through. It felt, at least for now, like a place where she could breathe. Neither of them said it out loud, but both understood. Something fragile had begun, and protecting it would require courage neither had fully tested yet. The change did not arrive all at once. It came slowly, like a shadow stretching longer each day. At first, Elias thought it was only his imagination, but small signs began to tell a different story. The animals grew restless at night. Birds lifted suddenly from the trees as if startled by distant movement. Once or twice, Elias found boot prints near the riverbank. Human prints, not Ayana's. Ayana noticed too. One evening, she stood at the edge of the field longer than usual, her eyes fixed on the hills. Her body was tense, her shoulders tight, as if she were listening for something beyond sound. Elias followed her gaze and felt a quiet worry settle in his chest. She told him that fear traveled faster than truth. Once people believed a story, it grew teeth of its own. Somewhere beyond the valley, someone had spoken her name or described her shape, and the story had begun to move. Elias wanted to argue, to say that the valley was forgotten, that no one cared enough to come this far. But deep down, he knew better. People had always feared what they could not control, and fear had a way of spreading Ayana. She still helped, but only when the land was empty and quiet. At night she watched the hills while Elias slept, though sleep came harder for him now. He dreamed of firelight and raised voices, of running feet and broken calm. One morning, Elias rode his old mule into the nearby town for supplies. He rarely went anymore, but the farm needed salt and tools. The town felt smaller than he remembered, yet louder. Conversation stopped when he entered the store. Eyes followed him. Not angry eyes, curious ones. The shopkeeper leaned in close and spoke in a low voice. He asked if Elias had seen anything strange near his land. Something large. Something dangerous. He answered carefully, saying he had seen nothing unusual. The shopkeeper nodded, but his eyes showed doubt. He mentioned that a group of men had been asking questions. They spoke of protecting the town, of stopping the threat before it grew. Elias left quickly, his supplies tied tight, his thoughts racing. The valley no longer felt hidden. It felt watched. When he returned home, Ayana was waiting near the river. She could read his face before he spoke. He told her what he had heard, every word. She did not seem surprised. Instead, a deep tiredness crossed her face, heavier than before. She said this was how it always went. A few quiet days, a small kindness. Then fear would arrive and demand payment. That night, voices echoed closer than before. Lantern lights flickered along the hills. Dogs barked in the distance. Elias stood outside his house, heart-pounding, while Ayana stayed near the trees, ready to move if needed. The searchers did not enter the valley that night, but they circled it like hunters testing the wind. In the days that followed, Tension filled every moment. Elias worked his fields with one ear always listening. Ayanna moved silently, watching paths and tracks, erasing signs of her presence. Their conversations grew shorter, heavier, not because trust had broken, but because words felt too small for what was coming. One afternoon, Elias found his fence torn down. Not carefully this time, but violently. Footprints surrounded the damage, many of them human. Anger rose in him, sharp and unexpected. This land had been his refuge. Now fear was trampling it. That evening, Ayanna spoke of leaving. She said it quietly, without drama. She explained that staying would only bring more danger to him. She had learned to carry risk alone. Letting someone else suffer for her presence felt worse than loneliness. Elias felt a sudden emptiness, like the ground dropping away. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she mattered here. But he also knew the cost of standing against fear. He had lived long enough to understand how quickly people turned cruel when they felt threatened. Still, something inside him refused to accept her words. He told her that running had never ended fear, only moved it. He said the land had room for both of them. He did not beg. He spoke plainly, honestly, the way he always had. Ayanna listened. Her eyes softened, but the worry did not leave. She said she had seen places burn for less than this. She had seen kindness vanish when fear took its place. Before Elias could answer, a shout echoed from the ridge. A lantern flared bright. A group of men had entered the valley. Everything moved at once. Ayanna stepped back, ready to disappear into the trees. Elias raised his hands and walked forward, toward the light. His heart raced, but his steps were steady. He knew this moment would shape everything that came after. The men called out, demanding to know who lived there and what he was hiding. Their voices were sharp, fueled by stories rather than facts. Elias answered calmly, saying this was his land and he had done nothing wrong. One of the men pointed toward the trees and shouted about the giant. Fear twisted his words into something ugly. The others shifted nervously, gripping their tools. Before Elias could speak again, Ayanna stepped into view. The valley fell silent. She stood tall and still, her hands open, showing she carried no weapon. The lantern light revealed her fully, not as a monster from stories, but as a person shaped by hardship and strength. Some of the men stepped back, others froze. Elias felt fear rise, but also pride. She had chosen not to hide. Ayanna spoke slowly, her voice clear and steady. She said she meant no harm. She said she had taken only what was offered and helped where she could. She said fear had followed her long enough. The men did not know how to respond. The stories they carried did not match the reality before them. Fear struggled against understanding. One man shouted that she should leave. Another said she should never have come. The group argued among themselves, uncertainty spreading. Elias spoke then. He said the land had known many kinds of people and many kinds of lives. He said fear was not protection. It was destruction wearing a mask. He reminded them that nothing bad had happened, that no one had been hurt. Silence followed. Finally, the men lowered their tools. Not all of them felt convinced, but none felt brave enough to push further. They backed away slowly, warning that they would return if trouble came. When the lights vanished and the valley grew quiet again, Elias felt his legs weaken. He sat heavily on the ground. Ayanna stood beside him, closer than ever before. That night changed something between them. They both knew the danger was not over. The valley would never be as invisible as it once was. The world beyond had noticed. But something else had happened too. For the first time, Ayanna had not faced fear alone. And for the first time in years, Elias had chosen connection over safety. As the stars filled the sky, neither spoke. Words were no longer needed. The struggle had begun in earnest, and whatever came next would test them in ways neither could yet imagine. After that night, nothing felt the same. The valley was still quiet, the river still flowed, and the fields still waited for work. But a heavy awareness settled over everything. Elias woke each morning with the same thought. They had been seen. Once fear finds a place, it rarely forgets the way back. Ayanna became more alert than ever. She moved carefully, choosing paths that left no marks. She watched the hills at sunrise and sunset, reading signs Elias could not see. When birds lifted suddenly or the wind shifted in a strange way, she noticed her body carried the memory of danger, and it guided her without effort. Elias tried to return to his routine, but his hands shook when he worked. He fixed the broken fence again, stronger this time, though he knew wood could not stop fear. He stored extra grain and filled water barrels. These small acts gave him a sense of control, even if it was only an illusion. They spoke more openly now, not because things were easier, but because silence felt heavier than words. One evening, sitting near the river, Ayana told Elias more about her past than she ever had before. She spoke of her childhood, of elders who taught her respect for the land, of songs sung under open skies. She spoke of the day everything changed, when fear turned neighbors into threats and safety into memory. Elias listened, his chest tight. He realized that while he had chosen a quiet life to escape pain, Ayana had never been given a choice. Her strength had been shaped by loss, not preference. In return, Elias spoke of his own turning point. He told her about the day he buried the last person who truly knew him, and how silence had slowly filled the space left behind. He admitted that he had stayed in the valley because leaving felt like another kind of loss. Ayana listened with the same care he had given her, her eyes steady and kind. For a short time it felt like they had built something solid between them, an understanding strong enough to face whatever came next. But fear does not wait politely. A few days later, Elias found a mark burned into a tree near the edge of his land. It was rough and careless, meant to warn rather than explain. He stood there a long time, his hand resting against the bark, knowing exactly what it meant. Someone had returned. That night, Ayana insisted on leaving before dawn. She said waiting would only make things worse. She spoke calmly, but Elias could hear the pain beneath her words. She had hoped, just a little, that this place might be different. Elias felt torn apart by the choice in front of him. Letting her go would keep him safe, but it would also mean surrendering to fear. Asking her to stay could cost her freedom. Or worse. He did not try to convince her with big promises. Instead, he asked one simple question. Where would she go? Ayana did not answer right away. She looked toward the distant mountains, her face unreadable. Finally, she said she would keep moving, as she always had. There were still empty places in the world. That answer settled something inside Elias. He realized that doing nothing was also a choice, and one he could no longer live with. This time, he did not avoid people's eyes. He went straight to the meeting place near the store, where the same men gathered. His arrival caused whispers to spread, but he stood firm. He spoke calmly, without anger. He told them the truth, that the woman they feared had helped him, harmed no one, and respected the land more than most. He said fear had already done enough damage in the world, and it did not need another victory. Some laughed, some scoffed, but others listened. Elias did not expect to change everyone's mind. He only hoped to slow the story before it grew sharper. When he returned to the valley, exhausted and unsure, Ayana was waiting. She could tell from his face that he had taken a risk. For the first time, she looked at him not just as a kind man, but as a brave one. That night the valley held its breath. Voices returned, closer and louder than before. More lanterns. More people. Elias stood beside Ayana, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might break free. He knew this moment would decide everything. Before anyone could shout or point, Ayana stepped forward. Her presence alone silenced the group. She raised her hands slowly, not in surrender but in peace. Her voice carried across the valley, steady and clear. She spoke of walking for years with nowhere to rest. She spoke of helping where she could and hiding where she must. She spoke of how fear had chased her across lands that once welcomed her people. She did not ask for pity. She asked for understanding. Elias stood beside her, smaller but unshaken. He said the valley was not owned by fear. He said the land had room for more than one kind of life. The crowd shifted. Some faces softened. Others stayed hard. But the anger that had fueled them earlier seemed weaker now, replaced by uncertainty. An older man stepped forward. His voice was tired, not angry. He said he had lived long enough to see fear destroy more than it protected. He said perhaps it was time to choose differently. That was the turning point. Not everyone agreed. Some turned away, muttering warnings. But others lowered their lanterns and stepped back. The group slowly broke apart, retreating into the night without violence. When the last light disappeared, Elias felt his knees give way. He sat down heavily, breath shaking. Ayana stood beside him, then slowly sat as well, careful not to overwhelm him. They knew this was not a perfect ending. Fear could return. Stories could change again. But something important had shifted. For the first time, Ayana felt seen without being hunted. For the first time, Elias felt that choosing connection had not destroyed him. As dawn approached, the sky lightened, soft and pale. The valley looked the same as it always had, but it no longer felt like a place only meant for hiding. It felt like a place where choices mattered. Whatever came next would not be easy. But they had reached a moment where running was no longer the only answer, and that in itself felt like a quiet victory. The days that followed were calmer, but not careless. The valley did not suddenly become safe, and fear did not disappear like mist under the sun. Instead, it loosened its grip, little by little. Elias and Aina understood this. They did not expect miracles. They only hoped for space to live without constantly looking over their shoulders. Morning returned to the land the way it always had. Light spilled over the fields. The river moved steadily, carrying no memory of human worry. Elias went back to his work, though his movements were slower now, more thoughtful. Ayana stayed nearby, sometimes visible, sometimes not, learning when to be seen and when to step back. Presence, they had learned, was a powerful thing when used with care. Word spread beyond the valley, but it changed as it traveled. Some still told the old fearful version. Others spoke of a quiet place where nothing bad had happened, where a large woman helped mend fences and clear stones, where a farmer stood his ground without raising his voice. Stories softened as they moved, losing sharp edges. A few people began to visit during the day, not crowds, just individuals. A trader passed through and found his cart freed from deep mud. A lost child was guided back to the road before sunset. No one announced these acts. They simply happened. Fear slowly made room for curiosity. Ayana did not try to become part of the town, and the town did not try to claim her. Instead, an unspoken agreement formed. She was there. She caused no harm. That was enough. Elias felt something inside him settle. For years, his life had been about endurance, getting through days without expecting more. Now, there was meaning in small things again. Shared work, quiet talks by the river, even silence felt different when it was chosen rather than forced. One evening, as they watched the sky turn gold, Ayana asked Elias a question she had carried for a long time. She asked him why he had stayed when he could have stepped aside, stayed quiet, stayed safe. Elias thought for a long moment before answering. He said that loneliness could teach a person many things, but courage was not one of them unless it was practiced. He said he had lived too long protecting himself from pain, and that protection had slowly turned into a cage. Standing beside her had felt like opening a door he thought was sealed forever. Ayana nodded. She understood cages, even invisible ones. As seasons changed, the valley changed with them. Crops grew stronger with her help. Heavy work became lighter. Elias's laughter returned in small, unexpected moments. Ayana smiled more often, not wide or loud, but real. She did not stop being careful. She never forgot the world beyond the hills, but she no longer carried every burden alone. One morning, Ayana told Elias she would leave for a time. The words did not bring fear this time. She explained that she needed to see other lands, to test whether the world could hold her without constant running. She said leaving no longer felt like being chased. It felt like choosing. Elias listened, his chest tight but steady. He told her the valley would remain, whether she stayed or went, that it would always welcome her. When she left, she did so in daylight. She did not hide. She walked openly along the river path, her steps sure, her head high. Elias stood by the fence, watching until she disappeared beyond the bend. The valley felt quieter, but not empty. Time passed. Months later, signs appeared again, familiar, gentle ones. A stack of firewood placed neatly near the house. Stones cleared from the far field. Ayana had returned, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she chose to. This time, her return felt like a beginning, not a rescue. Life settled into a new rhythm. Not perfect, not easy, but honest. People learned that fear did not have to decide everything. Some learned faster than others, but the valley held its ground, steady and patient, just like Elias had always been. Years later, travelers would speak of a quiet place where a farmer and a giant woman lived without trouble. They would say the land seemed peaceful there, as if it remembered something important about balance. And Elias, standing in his fields at sunset, would sometimes think about how close he had come to choosing silence instead of courage. He would watch Ayana move across the land with confidence and calm, and he would know that some harvests could not be measured in grain or weight. Some harvests were measured in understanding. The valley remained open, the sky wide above it, and in that wide space, two lives had found room, not just to survive, but to truly live.